The envelope landed on the kitchen table with a soft slap, and Priya Fontaine did not need to open it to know what was inside. She already knew the number. She had transferred it herself 3 hours ago from an account that was supposed to be for her rent, not for her younger cousin's car payment, not for her aunt's overdue credit card, not for whatever crisis her mother had decided was Priya's responsibility to solve this month. "You're a lifesaver," her mother said, sliding into the chair across from her with a smile that did not once acknowledge the exhaustion written across Priya's face. "I don't know what this family would do without you." Priya worked as a translator for a shipping firm in Los Angeles. Fluent in Japanese from 4 years of study, she had funded herself, waiting tables through college while her older sister took out loans their mother swore she would help repay and never did. 22 years old, and she had been the family's financial safety net since she was 14, since the day her father left, and her mother decided that the eldest capable child would simply absorb whatever gaps appeared in the household budget from that point forward. 8 years of it. 8 years of birthday money handed over before she could unwrap her own gifts. 8 years of her paycheck disappearing into the black hole of everyone else's emergencies before she had a chance to build anything of her own. "I have to go," Priya said, standing before her mother could produce the next request, the one already forming behind her eyes. "I have somewhere to be." She did not tell her mother where. She did not tell her mother about the man waiting for her 40 minutes away in a private dining room at a restaurant that did not have a name on the door, because her mother did not know that Priya had been seeing anyone at all, and Priya intended to keep it that way for as long as she possibly could. Kaito Sato was already seated when she arrived, a glass of water untouched in front of him, his dark eyes finding hers the moment she stepped through the door held open by a man who did not introduce himself and did not need to. Kaito rose slightly as she approached, an old-fashioned courtesy that still, for months into whatever this was between them, made something in Priya's chest tighten. He wore black, always black, a suit cut so precisely it looked less like clothing and more like architecture. Ink was visible at his collar where his shirt did not quite cover it, dark lines curling up from beneath the fabric that Priya had never once asked about, sensing, correctly, that the answer would arrive on its own timeline rather than hers. A thin scar crossed his left knuckles, pale against his skin, and his eyes, when they settled on her, carried the particular stillness of a man who had trained himself, over many years, never to let anything show on his face that he did not choose to show. "You are late," he said, though there was no real accusation in it, only observation. "Family emergency," Priya said, sitting across from him, exhaustion pulling at the edges of her voice despite her effort to hide it. Kaito studied her for a long moment, and Priya had learned by now that his silences were never empty. They were calculations, careful and precise, a man weighing exactly how much to say, and when. "Another one," he said finally. "Not a question. There's always another one." Priya reached for the water in front of her own place setting, needing something to do with her hands. "I don't want to talk about it." "You never want to talk about it," Kaito said, and something in his voice, quiet and observant, told Priya he had been keeping count. "This is the 6th time in 4 months you have arrived to see me carrying the weight of something you call an emergency and refuse to describe. I am beginning to understand a pattern I do not like." "It's not your problem to like or dislike," Priya said, sharper than she intended, immediately regretting the edge in her voice. "It's my family. I handle it." "You handle everything," Kaito said, and there was something underneath the words that Priya could not quite name, something that sounded almost like the beginning of anger, though his face remained perfectly composed. "That is not the same as things being handled well." Priya did not answer. She had spent 8 years defending her family's demands to herself so thoroughly that she rarely examined them anymore, and she was not prepared to start examining them now, across a table from a man whose entire existence operated by rules she still did not fully understand. She had met Kaito 4 months earlier, called to a warehouse near the port to translate a shipping dispute between a Japanese logistics company and an American distributor who had, it turned out, been quietly falsifying manifests for over a year. Priya had been hired through her firm for what was described as a routine contract negotiation. She had not been told that the man she would be translating for controlled significant portions of import traffic along the entire California coast, or that the meeting would end with the American distributor's business partner being escorted out by two men who did not speak and did not need to. She remembered the exact moment Kaido had turned to her afterward, in the sudden quiet of the emptied warehouse, and said her name for the first time.
Priya.
Not the careful, formal pronunciation her clients usually used. Something slower. Something that made the two syllables sound like they mattered. You translated exactly what was said, he had told her then. Not what you assumed I wanted to hear. That is rare. I'm good at my job, she had said. Yes, he had agreed. You are. That should have been the end of it. A single contract, a single afternoon, nothing more. But he had called her firm again the following week for a matter that did not, in retrospect, actually require a translator at all, and Priya, against every professional instinct she possessed, had said yes. Now, for months later, sitting across from him in a private dining room while her phone buzzed silently in her bag with a message from her mother she had no intention of reading tonight, Priya understood that whatever this was between them had stopped being simple a long time ago. Eat, Kaido said, as the first course arrived, carried in by a server who did not make eye contact with either of them. Whatever happened before you arrived, it does not need to follow you to this table. That's easier said than done. Most things worth doing are. He watched her for a moment longer, something shifting behind his eyes, and then, quietly, in a voice pitched only for her, he added, One day you'll tell me what they take from you. And one day, I suspect, I will not be able to remain as patient about it as I have been tonight. Priya did not know, sitting there in that quiet dining room, how soon that day would arrive. It arrived 9 days later, on a Tuesday evening, when Priya walked into her mother's house expecting the usual request for money, and found instead her mother, her sister, and her aunt gathered around the kitchen table with an expression on all three faces that told her this was not the usual request at all. Sit down, her mother said. Priya did not sit. What's going on? Her sister, Ambrosia, slid a folded piece of paper across the table, not meeting Priya's eyes. We know about him. The floor did not drop the way Priya expected it to. It simply tilted, slow and cold, as she understood exactly what her sister meant. Know about who? Priya said, though the lie tasted useless even as she said it. Kaido Sato, her mother said, and the name in her mother's mouth sounded wrong, sounded like something that did not belong there. Ambrosia saw you with him outside that restaurant on Fig Street 2 weeks ago. She recognized him from an article. Do you understand who that man is, Priya? Do you have any idea? I know exactly who he is, Priya said, steady despite the sudden pounding in her chest. Then you know he's dangerous, her aunt said, leaning forward, her voice pitched low and urgent. You know what kind of business a man like that runs. What were you thinking, bringing that kind of danger anywhere near this family? Priya felt something old and tired rise up in her chest. 8 years of resentment she had carefully buried under obligation finally beginning to surface. Near this family. That's what you're worried about. Not whether I'm safe. Not whether I'm happy. Whether his existence near me is a danger to the rest of you. Don't twist this, her mother snapped. We are worried about you. Are you? Priya said, and something in her voice made all three women go still. Because in 8 years, you have never once asked whether I was safe. You've never asked whether I was happy. You've only ever asked for money, and I've given it every single time because I told myself that's what family does. But the first time I bring something into my life that's actually mine, actually good, actually meant for me and not for the rest of you, suddenly you're concerned about danger. He is dangerous, Priya, Ambrosia said. That's not us being selfish. That's just true. Maybe, Priya said. But he has never once, in 4 months, asked me for a single dollar. He has never once made me feel like an ATM with a heartbeat attached. Can any of you say the same? The silence that followed was not the silence of agreement. It was the silence of people recalculating how to get what they wanted, and Priya recognized it instantly because she had spent 8 years learning every version of that particular silence. We need $11,000, her mother said finally, dropping the concern entirely, moving straight to the point the way she always eventually did. Your aunt's house is going into foreclosure. We thought, given your new relationship, given the resources that must be available to you now, that perhaps this was something you could finally help with in a real way. Priya stood very still, understanding arriving in her chest like a stone dropping through water. This was never about danger. This was never about safety. It was about access, about the sudden appearance of money adjacent to her life that they believed they were entitled to reach for the same way they had reached for every paycheck she had ever earned. No, Priya said. Excuse me? No. Priya repeated, and the word felt strange in her mouth, unfamiliar after 8 years of never once saying it. I'm not asking him for money. I'm not asking anyone for money. Aunt Delphine's foreclosure is not my emergency to solve, and I am done pretending it is. She left before anyone could respond, walking out into the cool evening air with her hands shaking, her chest tight with something that felt equal parts terror and relief. She did not call Kaido that night. She told herself it was because she needed time to think, though the truth, sitting heavier in her chest the longer she avoided it, was that she was afraid of what it would mean to let him see this particular wound, the one she had spent 8 years hiding even from herself. He called her instead, 2 days later, his voice carrying a controlled tension she had never heard from him before. Someone contacted my office, he said, without preamble. Priya's stomach dropped.
What?
A woman, claiming to be your aunt. She requested a meeting to discuss, in her words, financial support for family matters, given her understanding of my resources. His voice had gone very flat, very careful, and Priya understood, with sudden, sick clarity, exactly what her family had done. I did not take the meeting. I am calling instead to ask you what is happening, because I do not like learning about matters involving you from strangers who claim to be your family. Priya sat down hard on the edge of her bed, humiliation burning hot through her chest.
I'm sorry.
I didn't know they'd go around me. I told them no. Kaido, I swear I told them no. I believe you, he said, and something in his voice eased slightly, though the tension underneath remained. But I need you to tell me the truth now. All of it. How long has this been happening? Priya closed her eyes. 8 years. The silence on the line stretched long enough that Priya thought the call had dropped. 8 years, Kaido repeated finally, his voice low, controlled, and Priya recognized underneath the control something that sounded, unmistakably, like fury restrained by sheer force of will. Come to the house tonight. We are going to discuss this properly, and I am no longer willing to let you handle it alone. Priya arrived at his house that evening to find him standing at the window of his study, city lights spread out below in the dark, his jacket discarded over a chair in a way that told her he had been pacing before she arrived. Sit, he said, and then, catching himself, softened it. Please. She sat. He remained standing, his back partially to her, his hands loosely clasped behind him in a posture she had come to recognize as the shape he took when he was working very hard to control something. Tell me everything, he said. From the beginning. I do not want the summary you have clearly been giving yourself for 8 years. I want the truth. So she told him. The father who left when she was 14. The mother who decided, without ever discussing it, that the responsible eldest daughter would simply become the family's financial floor. The birthday money handed back before she could spend it, the tuition assistance that mysteriously stopped the semester her sister needed a car, the years of picking up extra shifts not to build her own future, but to patch holes in everyone else's present. Kaido listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening incrementally with each new detail, until finally, when she finished, he turned to face her fully, something raw and unguarded visible in his expression that she had never once seen from him before. My sister, he said, and Priya went very still, because in 4 months he had never once mentioned a sister. Her name was Yuki. She was 3 years older than me. When our father died, she took over running certain obligations within our organization that he left unfinished, obligations I was not yet considered ready to handle. She protected me from decisions that would have destroyed me at the age I was then. She carried weight that was never meant to be hers alone, because she believed that was what an older sibling did. She believed it so completely that she never once told anyone how much it was costing her, until the cost finally caught up with her in a way none of us saw coming. "What happened to her?" Priya asked quietly. "She was killed," Kaito said, his voice flat with the specific control of a man who had recited this fact to himself many times in order to survive saying it out loud. 6 years ago. A rival organization targeted her specifically because she had become the person everyone in my family leaned on, the person whose absence would do the most damage. They understood, better than we did at the time, that the ones who carry everyone else are often the most unprotected because everyone assumes they can simply keep carrying it. His eyes met hers, dark and direct. "I am telling you this because I recognize what I am looking at, Priya. I have watched you carry your family for 4 months without complaint, without asking anyone for help, exactly the way she did. I will not watch it happen again, and say nothing." Priya felt something crack open in her chest, old grief that was not even hers mixing with grief that was. "I don't know how to stop. I've been doing it so long, I don't know what's left of me underneath it." "Then we find out together," Kaito said, crossing the room and kneeling in front of her chair so their eyes were level, an act of deliberate vulnerability from a man who rarely lowered himself to anyone. "Starting tonight, you will not give them another dollar. You will not take another meeting on their behalf. And if they contact my organization again attempting to leverage my resources through you, they will learn very quickly that I do not respond kindly to being used as a lever against someone I care for." "Kaito." Priya's voice caught. "You can't just threaten my family, because they're difficult." "I am not threatening them," Kaito said. "I am informing you of a fact. There is a considerable difference, and you will understand it when the moment comes." The moment came 4 days later, when Priya's mother, Ambrosia, and her aunt Delphine arrived unannounced at Priya's apartment, having apparently decided that if Priya would not come to them with money, they would simply come to her with pressure instead. "You embarrass this family," her mother said, the moment Priya opened the door, not waiting to be invited in before pushing past her into the apartment. "Do you understand what it looked like having to be turned away by his people like we were nothing? Like we didn't matter? You went around me," Priya said, her voice steadier than she expected. "After I said no. You tried to extract money from someone I care about without my knowledge or consent. That's not embarrassment, Mom. That's a betrayal." "We are your family," Delphine said, her voice rising. "Family helps family. That's not betrayal. That's what you're supposed to do." "I have helped this family for 8 years," Priya said, something finally breaking loose in her chest that she had been holding back for far too long. 8 years, and not one of you has ever once asked what I needed in return. Not one of you has ever thanked me without immediately following it with another request. I am done. I am done being the emergency fund this family reaches for whenever things get hard. I have my own life now, and I am not going to let you drag it down the way you've dragged down everything else I've ever tried to build." "So that's it," her mother said, her voice cold. "Some man with money shows up and suddenly your own blood doesn't matter." "He didn't do this," Priya said. "You did. 8 years of you did this. He just finally made me see it clearly enough to say it out loud." Ambrosia, who had been quiet through most of the exchange, finally spoke, her voice smaller than the others. "Priya, please. Aunt Delphine really is going to lose the house." "Then Aunt Delphine can call the bank," Priya said, and her own voice surprised her with how steady it remained, the same way every adult who is behind on payments does. "I am not the answer to every problem this family creates for itself. I never should have let myself become that in the first place." Her mother's face had gone rigid with a fury Priya recognized from every argument of her childhood, the specific expression of a woman who had never once been told no by the daughter she had trained not to say it. "You'll regret this," her mother said. "When that man loses interest in you, and men like that always do eventually, you'll come crawling back to this family, and we will remember exactly how you treated us tonight." "Maybe," Priya said quietly. "But at least by then I'll know what it feels like to make a choice for myself instead of one for everyone else. I've never had that before. I'd like to try it." She asked them to leave. They did, eventually, though not without her mother delivering one final, cutting remark about ingratitude that Priya let slide off her without absorbing it the way she once would have. She was still shaking 20 minutes later when Kaido arrived, having been called by a security detail he had quietly stationed near her building without telling her, a fact she discovered only when he mentioned, almost offhandedly, that he had been informed the moment 3 unfamiliar visitors entered her apartment. "You had someone watching my building," Priya said, somewhere between annoyance and something warmer she did not want to examine too closely. "I had someone protecting you," Kaido corrected. "There is a difference, and after tonight, I suspect you understand it better than you did 4 hours ago." "They're not going to stop," Priya said, sinking onto her couch, exhaustion finally catching up with the adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation. "You don't know my mother. She doesn't hear no. She just waits for a better angle." "I do know women like her," Kaido said, sitting beside her, his voice quieter now, the earlier tension replaced by something more deliberate. "And I know that the only thing that stops someone who does not respect a boundary is a consequence significant enough that ignoring the boundary becomes more costly than respecting it." "What are you saying?" "I am saying that your aunt's foreclosure is not, as you correctly told her, your emergency to solve," Kaido said. "But it is, perhaps, an opportunity to ensure your family understands precisely what continuing to target you will cost them going forward." Priya turned to look at him fully, unease creeping into her chest. "Kaido, if you're talking about hurting them, I need you to stop right there."
I'm angry. I'm exhausted.
"But they're still my family, and I won't be part of anything that puts them in real danger." "I would never ask that of you," Kaido said, something gentling in his expression at the visible fear in hers. "What I am proposing involves no violence at all. It involves patience, paperwork, and the particular kind of leverage that comes from owning things quietly rather than announcing them loudly." Over the following 2 weeks, Priya watched her boyfriend do something she had not fully believed possible until she saw it unfold in real time. Through a series of transactions conducted entirely through legitimate business channels, using shell entities and real estate holding companies that existed for exactly this kind of quiet maneuvering, Kaido purchased the note on her Aunt Delphine's mortgage from the bank that held it, along with the outstanding debt on her sister Ambrosia's car loan, and the credit card balance her mother had been carrying for years that Priya had unknowingly been servicing through countless small transfers, disguised as gifts and loans. He did not announce any of it. He simply waited until every relevant debt her family owed ran, quietly and invisibly, back through entities he controlled, and then he asked Priya one final question before proceeding. "You have the ability now to forgive every debt they owe, in full, with a single signature," he told her, spreading the documents across his study desk one evening while she stared at numbers that represented, in total, more money than her family had extracted from her across 8 full years combined. "Or you can allow the debts to remain exactly as they are, structured on normal commercial terms, collected exactly the way any bank would collect them, with no special treatment extended in either direction because of their connection to you. The choice is entirely yours. I only wanted you to understand that the leverage they believed only I possessed has, in fact, belonged to you the entire time." Priya stared at the papers for a long time, feeling something shift permanently inside her chest. "I'm not forgiving anything," she said finally. "Not because I want them to suffer, but because forgiving it would just be one more version of me solving their problems for them, and I told myself I was done with that." "Then it stands as written," Kaido said, gathering the papers without judgment, without pressure either direction, exactly the neutral witness she had needed him to be. "Ordinary debt, ordinary terms, ordinary consequences if left unpaid. Nothing about their situation changes because of who you love. That is, I believe, precisely the point you were trying to make to them." Her mother called 4 days later, her voice tight with something that had never before existed in any conversation between them, genuine uncertainty about her own footing. "The bank changed hands," her mother said, without preamble. "Delphine's mortgage, Ambrosia's car loan, even my card. They all got sold to some holding company, and the new terms are strict, Priya. Real strict. Do you know anything about this?" Priya sat very still, feeling the old instinct rise in her chest, the automatic urge to smooth things over, to fix it, to make her mother's discomfort disappear the way she always had. She let the urge pass through her without acting on it. I know it means you're going to have to handle your own finances the way every other adult does, Priya said. I'm not going to apologize for that. You did this, her mother said, disbelief edging into her voice. You had him do this. To your own family. I didn't do anything except stop protecting you from the consequences of your own decisions, Priya said. That's not cruelty, Mom. That's just the first boundary I've ever actually held in my entire life. There was a long silence on the line. I don't know who you've become. I don't either yet, Priya said, and found, somewhat to her own surprise, that the admission did not frighten her the way it once would have. But I'm looking forward to finding out. She hung up before her mother could respond, and sat for a long time in the quiet of her apartment, feeling lighter than she had felt in years, the particular lightness of a weight finally set down after being carried so long she had forgotten what her own shoulders felt like without it. Kaito found her there an hour later, having let himself in with the key she had given him only 2 weeks earlier, an act that had felt, at the time, like the most significant risk she had taken in years. You look different, he said, studying her from the doorway. I feel different, Priya admitted. Lighter. Like I finally set something down I didn't even realize I'd been carrying my whole life. Kaito crossed the room and sat beside her, close enough that she could smell the faint trace of cedar and something sharper underneath, smoke maybe, or the particular cold, clean scent of a man who moved through dangerous rooms without ever letting the danger touch his own composure. 8 years, he said quietly. That is a long time to carry something no one ever asked you whether you wanted to carry. You could have handled it differently, Priya said, looking at him directly. You could have just paid them off yourself, made the problem disappear, made yourself the hero of the story. Most men in your position would have done exactly that. Most men in my position have never watched someone they value disappear underneath the weight of other people's expectations, Kaito said. I did not want to be your rescue, Priya. My sister did not need rescuing. She needed someone to notice what she was carrying before it destroyed her, and no one did, until it was too late for that noticing to matter. I was not going to make the same mistake twice. Priya reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his, feeling the particular steadiness of him settle something in her chest that had been unsteady for the better part of a decade. Thank you, she said. Not for buying the debts. For seeing me carrying something before I even understood I was allowed to put it down. You did the hardest part yourself, Kaito said, his voice low, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that no longer felt like assessment, only certainty. I only made sure the people who took advantage of that weight for 8 years finally understood there would be a cost to continuing. Months later, Priya sat across from him in the same private dining room where he had first told her, quietly, that one day she would tell him what her family took from her, that one day his patience would run out. The city moved beyond the windows, indifferent and endless, the same way it always had, except now Priya moved through it differently, lighter, steadier, a woman who had finally learned the specific weight of her own boundaries and found she could carry that weight far more easily than she had ever carried anyone else's. My mother called again, she said, turning her wine glass slowly between her fingers. And I let it go to voicemail, Priya said, something almost like a smile pulling at the corner of her mouth. I'll call her back when I'm ready. Not when she decides I should be. Kaito studied her for a long moment, something warm and unguarded moving behind his usually careful eyes, the specific expression she had learned, over months, belonged only to her, appeared only when they were alone, when the careful architecture of his public composure had no reason to hold. 8 years they used you as something to lean on, he said. I intend to spend considerably longer than 8 years, making sure no one ever mistakes you for that again. Priya reached across the table and took his hand, the ink at his wrist visible beneath his rolled sleeve, the scar on his knuckles pale against his skin, all of it as familiar to her now as her own reflection. I'm not asking you to fix my family, she said. I already know that's not how this works. I just needed someone to finally stand beside me while I fix myself. Then that, Kaito said, lifting her hand to press a kiss against her knuckles, slow and deliberate, is exactly what I intend to keep doing, for as long as you will allow it. Outside, The city lights blurred against the glass, and Priya Fontaine, 22 years old and finally, fully her own, understood that some debts were never meant to be repaid, only refused, and that the family she had built for herself, quiet and deliberate and entirely chosen, was worth infinitely more than the one that had only ever seen her as a resource to be spent.